The 2002 Sacramento Kings. During an era where isolation basketball was at its peak, the Sacramento Kings did not follow that trend. Instead, they had a very exciting playstyle, which was way ahead of their time. The 2001 to 2002 season was arguably the greatest season in their franchise history, and back then, when I was in 3rd grade, I still remember staying up late for so many nights just to watch their games at like 10 o'clock at night. If I had to pick any team from the 2000s who I think would be amazing to watch in this era, it would definitely be the 2002 Kings. So what made this team so great anyway? I mean, if you just look at their roster that year, it looked good, but nothing too eye-popping. Their leader and best player was Chris Webber, who was in the middle of his prime at 28 years old. He was surrounded by a couple of young, up-and-coming players in Peja Stojakovic, who averaged over 20 points a game, and he was one of the best three-point shooters ever. Mike Bibby, who was playing his first season in Sacramento. Previously, in the 2001 offseason, the Kings traded away the flashy, exciting Jason Williams for Bibby, who was a more steady, consistent point guard. And that's what the team needed. They also had older players like Doug Christie, who was an All-NBA defender, and Vlade Divac, who was nearing the end of his career, but he was still a solid contributor and actually made the All-Star team in the previous season. Rounding out the team, the main bench players were dynamic combo guard Bobby Jackson, backup center and great rebounder Scott Pollard, and a very, very young Hedo Turkoglu. Don't get me wrong, on paper they were still a talented, solid team, but their playstyle made the sum of their individual parts much greater than the whole. And how did that happen? Pretty much every player on that team was a good passer. On offense, you saw guys like Bobby Jackson, Peja, Christie constantly cutting, moving around, trying to get open. The offense never ran through just one player for an entire game. Sometimes it would be Mike Bibby running pick and rolls, driving and kicking, and other times it would be Divac or Webber making passes out of the high post. During an era where most teams ran very predictable offenses, the Kings were the major exception, and that's why they were effective. They had the 3rd best offensive rating in the league, but they also had the highest point differential and played at the fastest pace. They would get into their offensive sets really quickly, and they would always get off a good shot before the defense can react. If you combine their free-flowing, motion offense with the fact that the players had high basketball IQ, great court vision with constant movement and cutters and shooters, it's very frightening to play against. Honestly, I'm not a fan of comparing teams from different eras, but they were kinda similar to the modern-day Golden State Warriors. They obviously weren't as good when it comes to talent and shooting the three, although they did have Peja. But that type of off-ball movement and stressing the importance that every player on the floor is a playmaker, those were things that the Kings were known for back in the day. For reference, in that season, there was nobody on the team who averaged more than 5 assists per game, but they did have 3 players who averaged more than 4. As a team, they were 4th in the league in total assists per game, averaging about 24. They were also the 2nd best rebounding team in the league, anchored by Divac and Chris Webber, and finished 6th in defensive rating. Basically, they had all of the tools to win the championship, and most people at the time thought that they would. The Kings ended the regular season with a league-best 61-21 record, and they had home court advantage throughout the entire playoffs. In the first round, they faced off against the 8th-seeded Utah Jazz, led by John Stockton and Karl Malone, who were basically 40 years old at this point. The Kings and Jazz were 2 of the best offensive teams in the league, but this series would be a grind fest. Neither team cracked the 100-point mark in any game, but the Kings were able to handle them and win the series 3-1. In the next round, they faced the hyper-efficient Dallas Mavericks, who had the highest offensive rating in the entire league. As expected, this series became a shootout. It wasn't looking too good when Stojakovic suffered a sprained ankle in Game 3, but Bibby, Jackson, and Turkoglu stepped up their games. C-Webb continued his amazing play in the playoffs, averaging 25, 11, and 3 with 2 blocks per game in the series, as the Sacramento Kings advanced to the Western Conference Finals. Wow, if someone said that today, I'd probably think that they were joking. But anyway, the Kings met the defending champion Los Angeles Lakers. I'm sure most of you already know about the controversies surrounding this series, especially in Game 6, so I don't want to talk about it too much. Regardless, this is still considered one of the greatest playoff series of all time. The first 5 games were incredibly competitive, and it also included a couple of buzzer beaters. Robert Ory's game-winning three-pointer tied the series at 2 games apiece, but then Mike Bibby's game-winning jumper in Game 5 gave the Kings a 3-2 series lead. This sets up the stage for Game 6, arguably the most controversial playoff game in NBA history. To sum it up, a lot of calls did not go in favor of the Kings near the end of the game, and the Lakers ended up shooting 27 free throws in the 4th quarter alone. Some believe that this game was rigged for money because the NBA wanted the series to go to a Game 7, but others think that it was related to the Tim Donaghy scandal. Either way, we don't know for sure, but after the Game 6 loss, the Kings could not recover from it and lost Game 7 as well, ending their amazing season. However, what's been swept under the rug was that in Game 7, Christie and Stojakovic combined to shoot 5 for 23 from the field, including 0 for 9 from 3. The Kings were still able to keep it close and they had a chance to win, but with those couple of poor performances, that was the final nail in the coffin. So, what was the aftermath of this spectacular season? Well, it wasn't that good. First off, the Kings organization decided to keep the core intact and not make any drastic changes to the team, which does make sense. They did add a couple of more veterans in Keon Clark and Jim Jackson, but that was pretty much it. In the 2002-2003 season, they were off to another great start and finished the season with 59 wins. Weber and Stojakovic were selected for the All-Star team again, and Bibby was continuing to improve. However, in the second round of the playoffs against the Mavericks, something awful happened, and it would change the course of the Kings franchise for years to come. At the end of Game 2, Weber was driving down the lane and suffered a devastating knee injury. He was diagnosed with a torn ACL, and yeah, without him, the Kings' chances of winning the title was 0. There was no chance for them now after losing their superstar, and they fell to the Mavericks in 7 games. Weber spent nearly an entire year recovering from knee surgery, but fortunately the 2003-2004 Kings were still pretty good. They were able to get Brad Miller over the offseason, and surprisingly, he filled in at Weber's place quite nicely. He had his best season of his career, averaging 14 points, 10 rebounds, and 4 assists per game, while also getting selected to the All-Star team. Weber returned to the court in March, but it was clear that he looked a lot slower and lost his explosiveness. Although he's been injury-prone for most of his career, the knee injury was the final straw that caused his downfall. Despite being an MVP candidate in the previous 2 seasons, Weber was never able to return back to that form. The Kings lost in the second round of the 2004 playoffs to the Timberwolves after he missed a game-tying 3-point attempt.
Weber with a tie, and the Minnesota Timberwolves are going to the Western Conference Finals.
One season later, Weber would get traded to the Sixers, and that pretty much ended their championship window. Shortly after, the rest of that core of players would get traded as well, as the Kings would start over and rebuild their team from the beginning. And that's all, folks. The 2002 Kings were one of the most fun and exciting teams I've ever watched. Unfortunately, they weren't able to sustain their success, and looking back, there wasn't anything they could do to help it. Whenever a team superstar suffers a career-altering injury in the middle of his prime, it's nearly impossible to recover from it. Up until today, they still haven't made the playoffs since 2006, and it doesn't look that will change in the near future. The Kings had a short window of opportunity, and some would say that they were robbed in the playoffs, but we can't do anything about that now. What we can do is appreciate that team for bringing us endless hours of entertainment and great basketball. A team that was 10 or 15 years ahead of their time. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope y'all enjoyed that video, and I'll see you next time. Peace.